Right, well, we're going anything?
Yeah?
What's this? I'll put that on. Sure about it. I could bloody do.
Auf Wiedersehen, Pet put 7 men in a German building hut, and one of them was dead before the second series had finished filming. Gary Holton played Wayne, the flash one, the earring and the grin and the leather trousers. He was 33 years old. I will tell you exactly what happened to him and how on earth they finished those episodes without him when we reach his name at the end. Because 43 years on, 5 of the 7 are still with us, and the 2 who are gone are not the 2 most people guess. Let us begin with the man whose face you have seen more often than any of the others, usually without knowing where. Barry Taylor, Brummie, electrician, owner of the most catastrophic taste in leisure wear ever committed to British television. The joke that runs underneath Timothy Spall's performance is that he is not from Birmingham at all. He is a Londoner, born in Battersea, and that accent was built from scratch and then worn for 4 series without a single slip. Ask anybody from the Midlands and they will tell you it is the hardest accent in England to fake because it sits so close to comedy that most actors overshoot it in the first line. Spall never once overshoots it. What he found in Barry was something the script only half suggested. Barry is a decent, careful, slightly pompous man who wants the world to be sensible and keeps discovering that it is not. He is the one who reads the instructions. He is the one who has a system, a folder, a plan for the weekend. Watch the scenes where the system collapses and you will see Spall doing almost nothing with his face while the whole thing falls apart behind his eyes. That is not a comic actor doing bits. That is a serious actor who has decided the funniest thing in the room is a man trying very hard to keep his dignity. And it is worth remembering why that hut existed at all, because the programme grew straight out of what was happening outside the window. Britain in the early 80s had shed industry at a speed nobody had prepared for, and whole streets in the northeast had gone from full employment to nothing inside a few years. Men who had trades, brickies, chippies, sparks, plasterers, did the only arithmetic available and got on a coach to Germany, where the building work was. Thousands of them. It was not an adventure, and nobody pretended it was. It was a wage, sent home in an envelope. Franc Roddam had the idea, and Dick Clement and Ian Frenais wrote it, and between them they made one crucial decision. They refused to make it a documentary about unemployment. There are no speeches. Nobody explains the politics to you. It is just 7 men, a kettle, a card game, and a very long way from home, and the ache does all the work by itself. That is also why it was made in the Northeast's own accent, at a time when British television still largely assumed everybody either sounded like London or was a joke. The series treated Geordie as simply how people talk. It is difficult now to convey what that meant to an audience that had never once heard itself on television without a punchline attached. He had come to it the hard way. He was a stagehand and a jobbing nobody who talked his way into Raider in his late teens, and he walked out of it carrying the Bancroft Gold Medal, which is the prize the school hands to the best of its year. That should have opened every door in London. In practice, he spent years being told he was the wrong shape. Too heavy, too odd-looking, too obviously not a leading man. And he has said since that the hut in Düsseldorf was the first job where nobody asked him to be anything other than what he was. Nobody watching him in 1983 would have predicted what came next. And I want to be specific about it because it is genuinely extraordinary. In 2014, the Cannes Film Festival gave him its Best Actor prize for playing the painter J.M.W. Turner. 2.5 hours of grunting, squinting, spitting at a canvas, barely a conventional line of dialogue in it, and the international press spent a year arguing about whether it was the performance of the decade. Barry from the building site, in a top hat, holding the room at Cannes. Here is the part of his life that almost ended all of it before any of that could happen. In 1996, he was 39 and working steadily, and he began to feel wrong in a way he could not explain. The diagnosis was acute myeloid leukemia. He was told in the plainest possible terms that without immediate treatment, he had weeks left. He spent months in isolation on a hospital ward, lost his hair and a frightening amount of his body weight, and afterwards described the experience as being taken to pieces by strangers and then reassembled slightly differently. His wife Shane, whom he married in 1981 and who is still his wife now, sat with him through the whole of it. He has spoken about the moment a nurse told him his blood counts had turned, and about walking out of that building into ordinary daylight with no idea what to do with himself. He has also said something that explains the entire second half of his career. He came out of that ward having stopped being frightened of looking foolish. When you no longer mind looking foolish, there is nothing an audience can do to you. So the work changed. He is Peter Pettigrew in the Harry Potter films, the snivelling betrayer with the silver hand, which means an entire generation who have never heard of a German building site know that face perfectly well. He is the doomed, decent brother-in-law in Mike Leigh's Secrets and Lies. He has played Winston Churchill and Ian Paisley, and a hangman and a serial killer's father. And in his 60s, he bought a Dutch barge and took himself and Shane around the coast of Britain with a camera crew following, largely because he had always wanted to and could not think of a good reason not to. There is one more thing about him that belongs here. When the series was revived in 2002, nearly 20 years on, Spall came back as Barry without a moment of hesitation. And by then, he was an internationally known film actor who did not remotely need to. He has been asked about that more than once, and the answer has always been the same in substance. Those men gave him the first job where he was allowed to be himself, and you do not walk away from that because your circumstances have improved. All 7 of the surviving cast came back. Not one of them had to. Watch the revival and you can see the whole of his career in one performance. Barry is older, richer, more insufferable and considerably more lost, and Spall plays the loneliness underneath it so lightly that most viewers laughed all the way through and only felt it afterwards. He is 69 now, he works constantly, and he remains one of the very few British actors alive who can make you laugh out loud and then genuinely frighten you inside the same scene. The next name had a #1 record. Not a joke record, not a novelty single off the back of a sitcom. 3 weeks at the top of the actual charts from a man who had never had a lesson in singing or in acting. Oz, Leonard Jeffrey Osborne, the one you would not want beside you on the coach and the one this series is secretly about. Jimmy Nail was not an actor when he got that part, and it is worth sitting with what that means. He was a Geordie who had worked as a glazier and in a slaughterhouse, and before that he had served time in strange ways for headbutting a man in a fight. He has never once tried to tidy that up in an interview. Even the name is a joke that hardened into a fact. He was born Jimmy Bradford, stood on a nail on a site, and everybody called him Nail for the rest of his life. He went to an audition in Newcastle because somebody dared him to, walked in with no training and no agent and no idea what he was doing, and walked out with one of the great British television characters. What makes Oz work is that Nail flatly refuses to make him likeable. Oz is a bigot and a bully. He is also lonely, homesick, frightened and completely out of his depth, and Nail plays all of that at the same time without ever once asking you to forgive him. There is a moment in the first series where the others are talking about their families and Oz says nothing at all, and the silence tells you everything the script never bothers to. When the show came back in 2002 and Oz had softened a little with age, a great many viewers wrote in to complain, which tells you how much they had come to rely on him being awful. Then came the second life, and it is stranger than the first. He created and starred in Spender, a Newcastle detective series he co-wrote himself. Then came Crocodile Shoes, in which he played a factory worker who becomes a country singer. And here is the part people still do not believe. The songs were real. Nail wrote them and recorded them and released them, and the soundtrack went multi-platinum. In 1992, his single Ain't No Doubt sat at #1 in Britain for 3 weeks. The album sold in the millions across Europe. A man who left school with nothing, who had done time, who had never been taught either trade, ended up with 2 careers that most people would take one of and retire happy. He played Magaldi in Alan Parker's film of Evita, opposite Madonna. He wrote a musical, and then he did the thing almost nobody in this industry ever does. He stopped. He has kept himself out of public life for years now, turns down most of what is offered, gives almost no interviews, and appears content to let it all stand as it is. I want to be fair to him about one thing, because it gets misreported. Nail did not vanish out of bitterness or scandal. He simply appears to have decided somewhere in his 40s that he had said what he had to say. He had written his own series, played his own songs, filled arenas across Europe, and been famous enough for long enough to see exactly what it does to people. And then he chose the other thing. There is a scene late in the original run where Oz, drunk and cornered, finally admits out loud how much he misses his son, and Neville plays it with his back half to camera because he cannot let the man be seen doing it. No trained actor would make that choice. It is not a technique. It is a person who understands from the inside that some men would rather be shouted at than looked at. He is 72. Every few years, a newspaper runs a piece asking where he went, and the answer appears to be that he went home and stayed there. The next one spent nearly 30 years playing the same policeman, and he only became an actor at all because he could not face the alternative career he had already started. Neville Hope was the young one. Newly married, homesick from the first minute, ringing Brenda from a phone box in the rain and telling her everything was fine when it plainly was not. Kevin Whately came from a village in Northumberland, and what almost nobody realises is how close he came to a completely different life. He had begun training as a chartered accountant, not considering it, doing it with the ledgers and the examinations and the suit. He got far enough in to understand exactly what the next 40 years would look like, and then he walked away from it and went to drama school in Newcastle instead, which is, when you think about it, an extremely Neville decision. The quiet, careful man who suddenly does the brave thing while everybody is looking the other way. 4 years after The Hut, he was cast as Sergeant Robbie Lewis alongside John Thor in Inspector Morse. That is the job that took him around the world because Morse sold everywhere. It ran on American public television for years and built him an audience who have never seen a minute of Auf Wiedersehen, Pet. The original series ran until 2000. Then, 6 years after Thor's death, the character came back with Lewis promoted to Inspector and given his own show, and Whately played him for another 9 years. Add it up. He played the same man, on and off, for the better part of 3 decades. That is a longer run than most marriages, and Whately has been honest about what it cost him when Thor died in 2002. They had worked side by side for so long that he found it genuinely difficult to go back to Oxford at all, and he has said he only agreed to Lewis once the script convinced him it was not going to be a cash-in on a dead friend. Away from the camera, he has been married to the actress Madeleine Newton since the mid-70s, which in this business is close to a miracle, and he has given years of unpaid work to a dementia charity after watching the illness take people close to him. It is worth pausing on what Morse did for him internationally, because it is the reason his name means something in countries that never saw this series. Morse was sold to more than 200 territories. In America, it ran for years on public television, in the slot where a certain kind of viewer settles in on a Sunday evening. And for millions of those people, Kevin Whately is not a bricklayer from Newcastle at all. He is a Geordie detective in Oxford, the decent one, the one who does the actual work while the clever man drinks. He has said that the two jobs are more closely related than they look. Neville and Lewis are the same species of Englishman. Quiet, dutiful, underestimated by everybody in the room, and right rather more often than the loud ones. He has spent 40 years being cast as that man because he is exceptionally good at making decency watchable, which is far harder than it sounds. And in the revival, Neville's story goes to a place the original never dared. The marriage he spent 4 series homesick for has become something harder and sadder. And Whately plays those episodes with a weariness that lands like a punch, if you remember the boy in the phone box. He is 75. He still has the voice, that flat, decent, unhurried Northumbrian voice that made Neville sound like the only honest man in Germany. We are halfway down the list now, and the question I put to you at the start is still sitting there. 5 of the 7 are with us. Which 2 are not? I will say only this much before we carry on. One of them you may have guessed already because his story was in every newspaper in the country at the time. The other one will surprise a great many of you because he was the one who looked indestructible, and he was gone within weeks of finding out anything was wrong. If you are enjoying this, tell me in the comments which of the 7 you remember most clearly. I read them, and the answers are never the ones I expect. Still to come. The one whose son you have almost certainly listened to at full volume without ever connecting the 2 names. Dennis Patterson was the foreman, the reluctant one, the man holding 7 grown adults together with nothing but a raised eyebrow and an occasional threat. Tim Healy was born in Benwell, in the West End of Newcastle, and he had worked as a labourer and an electrician long before acting became a realistic possibility. That is not a piece of trivia. It is the reason The Hut feels real. Half of that cast had actually done the work, and you can tell because not one of them ever looks like a man pretending to hold a tool. There is a way of picking up a bag of plaster that you cannot act, and they all have it. He came out of the Newcastle theatre scene, and he has never really been off television since. He was Les, later Leslie, in Benidorm, the sunburnt Yorkshireman on the sun loungers, for the best part of a decade. It is a completely different register of comedy, broader and sillier and much more forgiving, and he was superb in it because he plays a man's dignity exactly as seriously as Spall does. He has done Shakespeare and he has done pantomime in the same year, and he treats both as proper jobs, which not everybody in his position does. The private life is where most people connect the dots and stop dead. He was married to the actress Denise Welch for over 20 years. Their son is Matty Healy, the frontman of the 1975, one of the biggest British bands of the last 15 years, a man who fills arenas on 3 continents. So there are teenagers in stadiums in America screaming at a singer whose father was laying bricks in a German television series before their parents met. Healy has spoken, with a lot of good humour, about the peculiar experience of being stopped in the street now by people who want to talk about his son rather than about 35 years of his own work. And he has stayed loyal to the North East in a way that costs money. He has kept his base there, worked in its theatres when London was offering more, and put his name and his time behind local productions for decades. In May 2024, the surviving cast came together at Newcastle City Hall to mark 40 years since the series began, in front of a hall full of people who had grown up on it. Healy was at the centre of it, as he has been at the centre of every gathering this cast has ever had. Watch him in the hut again with that in mind. Dennis is the one who never gets a storyline of his own because he is too busy carrying everybody else's. Healy plays him as a man permanently 3 seconds away from losing his temper and never quite doing it, and 40 years on that is still the performance holding the whole thing together. He is 74. Still working, and still, by the account of everybody at every reunion this cast has had, the one who organises the rest of them. The next man's face has been in more Hollywood blockbusters than the rest of this cast put together, and you have almost certainly never once noticed him. Moxie, the quiet scouser with the past who sets things alight and then apologises for the inconvenience. Christopher Fairbank plays him with such stillness that he can disappear inside a scene with 6 loud men in it, and then one line lands and you understand he has been the most interesting person on the screen for a minute and a half. Moxie has the saddest history of any of them and the fewest words to describe it with, and Fairbank makes that silence do all the work. Now the surprise, and I would like you to go and check this yourself afterwards because it is more fun that way. Watch Alien 3. The prisoner Aaron, the one the other inmates call 85 because they have decided that is his IQ, is Christopher Fairbank under a shaved head. Watch Tim Burton's Batman. He is one of Jack Napier's henchmen in the middle of the most famous vandalism scene of the entire 80s. Watch Guardians of the Galaxy. He is the broker, the nervous, fussy little man in the shop who will not take Star-Lord's business and lives to regret it. 3 enormous films, 3 completely different human beings, 1 actor that nobody in the audience spotted. That is a particular kind of career, and it is not an accident. Fairbank has said in interviews that he actively prefers not to be recognised, because the second an audience knows your face, they stop believing in the character standing in front of them. It is an unfashionable position, and it has kept him in constant work for 50 years. Theatre, television, film, even video games, still turning up in major productions well into his 60s. There is one moment of his I would point anybody towards. Moxie spends the whole of the first series being the man nobody asks about, and when the reason finally arrives, it is delivered almost as an aside. No music, no close-up, no pause for the audience to be moved. Fairbank throws it away completely and it lands 10 times harder for it. That is a stage actor's instinct, and he has spent 50 years being trusted with it. He also did the hardest thing an actor in an ensemble like this can do. He came back in 2002 and let Moxie be visibly worse off than the others, older, poorer, further behind, without ever asking the audience to feel sorry for him. Most performers cannot resist that. He simply refused. He is 72. He remains the member of this cast you would walk straight past in the street, having watched him 3 times that month. The next name is the largest man in that hut, and one of the largest in British film. He is also the first of the 2 we lost, and he went a great deal faster than anybody was ready for. Bomber, 6'5", West Country accent, endless patience, and the calmest human being in the series. Pat Roach really was that size, and he had really used it. Before acting, he spent the best part of 20 years as a professional wrestler, a genuine name on the Saturday afternoon bills that half of you grew up with, and he ran a gym and a scrap business in Birmingham alongside it. He was a working man who happened to be built like a cathedral door, which brings us to a run of credits that people simply do not believe when you list them. Roach is the German mechanic in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The enormous bald man who fights Indiana Jones beside the flying wing and loses an argument with a propeller. He then came back and played entirely different men in both of the next 2 Indiana Jones films, which is a distinction hardly anybody else in cinema holds. He fought Sean Connery in Never Say Never Again. Stanley Kubrick used him in Barry Lyndon. He turns up in Willow. He is there in Clash of the Titans. Put simply, if a film in the 70s or 80s needed a mountain who could also act, somebody in Los Angeles telephoned Birmingham. And still, by the account of every single person who ever shared a set with him, he was the gentlest man on it, softly spoken, endlessly patient with the younger ones. Members of this cast have told the story more than once of Roach ending an argument in that hut, simply by standing up slowly and waiting. He had made it back for the revival too. Bomber returned in 2002 and again in 2004, and the writers gave him a storyline that let him be the moral centre of the thing, which is exactly what he had always quietly been. Those were among the last performances he gave. In the spring of 2004, he was told he had cancer of the throat. He died on the 17th of July that year at 67, only a few weeks after the diagnosis, with plans in the diary and work booked in. The tributes that week all said the same thing in slightly different words. The biggest man any of us ever met, and the softest. Birmingham took it hard. He had never left the city, never moved to London, never behaved for a moment as though appearing in 3 Indiana Jones films made him different from the men he had grown up with. There are people in that city who still talk about him as a local before they mention the films at all, which leaves the one I promised you at the beginning, and the reason this series carries a shadow that no other British comedy of its era has to carry. Wayne Winston Norris, the Cockney Chippy, the one who pulls, the one with a story about everything, the one in the leather trousers with the completely unearned confidence. Gary Holton was not a jobbing actor who happened to look right. He was a rock singer, and a genuinely well-known one in a small world. The frontman of the Heavy Metal Kids, a band that came roaring out of the same London ferment that produced punk. And he had spent his 20s on stages, and in tour vans, and in all of the trouble that came free with them. He brought every bit of that to Wayne. The looseness of the character, the sense that he might do absolutely anything in the next 30 seconds, is not on the page. It is a man who actually lived that way, being pointed at a camera and told to be himself. The band had never quite broken through, and that matters to the story. The Heavy Metal Kids were loved by the people who saw them and never sold in the numbers that would have made him rich, and Holton had spent years watching contemporaries go past him. Acting was supposed to be the second act. He had already been picking up television parts, and by 1983 he had landed in a series that the whole country was suddenly talking about. He was 31 years old, and it was, finally, working. That is the detail that makes it sit so badly. This was not a man in decline being given a last chance. This was a man on the way up, in the middle of the best thing that had ever happened to him, who did not get to see where it went. By the autumn of 1985, the second series was nearly finished. Holton had filmed most of his material. On the 25th of October, he was found dead at a flat in London. He was 33 years old. The inquest heard that he had taken morphine and drunk alcohol and recorded a verdict of misadventure. Not a deliberate act, but the end of a habit that had been running quietly alongside the fame for years. The production was left with a problem that had no good answer. Series 2 was incomplete. The remaining scripts still had Wayne in them, and the episodes were already scheduled. So they did the only thing available to them. They rewrote what could be rewritten, moved Wayne's lines to other characters where it was possible, and for the scenes they could not lose, they used a double, filmed from behind, at a distance, in the dark, so that the character could still be in the room without the audience ever seeing a face that was not his. Go back and watch those late episodes now, knowing, and you can find the joins. A shoulder in a doorway, a figure at the far end of a corridor, a suddenly very convenient reason for Wayne to be somewhere else this week. The cast were grieving while they filmed it. The audience did not know until it went out, and that is why the whole series sits differently in the memory than it should. It is a comedy about men leaving home to work, and one of them never came home, and the programme had to carry on around the hole where he had been. The cast have spoken about it in the years since, and what comes through every time is that nobody saw it coming. He was not a man falling apart on set. He was funny, he was professional, he turned up and did the work, and the other side of his life stayed on the other side of a door. That is the part that still catches them out 4 decades later. The ordinariness of the last time they saw him. There is a cruelty in the timing too. The second series went out to enormous audiences. The character became a national favourite. Wayne got the laughs, the lines and the reputation, and the man who built him was already gone before most of the country had finished watching. He is buried in London. 4 decades on, strangers still leave flowers. Some of them people who were teenagers when the heavy metal kids played, and some of them people who only ever knew him from a building site in Düsseldorf. So, 7 men in a hut in 1983. Timothy Spall came through leukaemia and ended up collecting the acting prize at Cannes. Jimmy Nail had a #1 record and then chose silence. Kevin Whately became one of the most recognised policemen on television for 30 years. Tim Healey is still working and now gets stopped in the street about his son. Christopher Fairbank has been hiding in your favourite films for half a century. Pat Roach was taken in a matter of weeks in 2004, and Gary Holton never lived to see the programme that made his name reach its end. 5 of the 7 are still with us. Given how many of them were doing genuinely dangerous work before an audition changed everything, that is a better score than this cast had any right to expect. What has always struck me about Auf Wiedersehen, Pet, is that it never once announced what it was about. It was 7 men, a kettle and a hut in a country none of them wanted to be in. And out of that, somehow, British television produced the truest thing it has ever made about what it costs a man to leave home in order to work. You can measure that by what happened to the people who made it. 2 of the 7 were dead before their time, and 5 of them are still here. And in between, they collected a prize at Cannes, a #1 single, 30 years of primetime detective work, a decade of sunshine comedy, 50 years of quietly stealing scenes in enormous films, and 3 appearances opposite Indiana Jones. Not one of those things was predictable from a photograph of 7 men standing outside a portable building in 1983. And the programme itself never got the treatment its audience thought it deserved. It won awards, it was repeated for years, it came back twice to enormous figures, and it still tends to be filed under nostalgia rather than under drama. Watch the last episode of the original run again. Nobody wins anything. They go home or they do not. And the ones who go home are not sure what they are going back to. There is no British comedy of that era that ends with less comfort, and there is none that has aged better. And it turned out to be about far more than building. Ask anybody who was sent away for work in those years, to Germany, to the rigs, to the Gulf, to wherever the money was that month, and they will tell you the programme got the small things exactly right. The letters that arrive 4 days late, the phone box with the queue outside it, the photograph pinned above the bed that you stop looking at because it hurts, the pretending on both ends of the line that everything is fine. That is why it still plays. The building trade has changed beyond recognition, and the countries have changed, and the money has changed. And none of that matters, because the loneliness has not changed at all. If you sat down for that on a Friday night, tell me below which of the 7 you would have shared that hut with. I know perfectly well which one I would not have. Thank you for staying with me. There will be another one along in a few days.